Okay, so, yes, I understand and I have read the Old Testament. That was a very primitive and very barbaric time. There was a new covenant. Christ wished for people to become more civilized. That's why he said, you must be born again. It was a new covenant. There was redemption. Christ said, let those who are without sin cast the first stone. Those who live by the sword will die by the sword. He told the people that were picking up swords to defend them to put them away. You see, the Old Testament was full of very savage, barbaric, primitive atrocities, cultures, whatever, and Christ wished to bring people away from that in the fullness of time. And with the new covenant, he did away with that. And then 600 years, Muhammad comes along and he reestablishes the stoning of adulterers and decapitating people and cutting off limbs. And it's funny because some people become Muslim because they say, well, Christians had slaves. That is the most stupid thing I've ever heard. You want to know why? Because Jesus Christ did not have any slaves. Muhammad did. And the transatlantic slave trade, the vast majority of those slaves did not go to the United States. They went to South America. There were actually more slaves that went to the Arab nations than to the United States. The Arabs were extremely cruel. Turkey was a Christian country. Palestine, that was taken by the Muslims illegally. North Africa and Egypt, that was a Christian nation. Some of the oldest Christians, the Coptics, Egyptian. And the Muslims went in there and they conquered and they manipulated and they treated people like garbage. And they still do. And it's interesting, black people think somehow Islam is a black religion. Muhammad would have been about as dark as Christ and the apostles. Muhammad would have been, if he was clean shaven and he wore European clothes, he'd look probably like a Spaniard or an Italian or something like that, just olive complected. But not only that, it's not a black religion. In fact, the Muslims kill a lot more black people than Christians do, at least in my present age. Somalians are constantly killing each other. In the Congo, Muslims are constantly blowing people up and killing each other. Boko Haram in Nigeria, constantly killing people. They're constantly violent. They're causing problems everywhere. Islam has always been violent. They conquered the majority of Spain. For 600 years, the Spaniards fought these Muslims. They kicked them out of Spain finally. They wanted their country. They were so angry, they said, convert or get out of here. And rightfully so. And it led to the Spanish Inquisition. Why did the Crusades happen? Because the Muslims were stealing land illegally that didn't belong to them. The land, those nations that are Islamic, that's land that was stolen by military force. And they conquered a bunch of France and were kicked out. They were going to conquer Italy, and their fleet got sunk at Lepanto, and now they're trying to conquer Europe again. And Europeans are just so stupid and buying all this stuff about Islam being a religion of peace. Now, what really ticks me off about Islam is, as I said before, we have entire nations, like Saudi Arabia, and some are even more deplorable, where people are terrorized, where women have no rights, where people are kept uneducated, where people are forced by law to not even question the truth or speak against it. They can't even speak their mind. At a minimum, they'll get, in Saudi Arabia, they're looking at 10 years in prison and 1,000 lashes just for speaking against, the religion or questioning it or blasphemy. It's either that or get their heads cut off. Women buried up to their waist and stoned to death. And yes, I've seen it. I've seen many barbaric practices. You'll show me pictures of, the United States dropped a bomb and this is what happened to people. Yeah, and you know what? And I've seen lots of women dragged out into the streets and seen the horrified look on their faces while their skulls are split open with rocks and cinder blocks and their blood flowing through the streets. And this is not hundreds of years ago like the Crusades or the Inquisitions. This is presently happening. And it always has happened in my lifetime. There's no Crusades or Inquisitions in my lifetime forcing Christianity upon people. Islam has been forcing Islam upon people all over the place in Africa and the Middle East, and causing problems in Europe, causing problems in America. Okay? It started off violent. It continues to be violent. They are not growing up. They're not becoming civilized. You see, Christians are growing up. They're growing out of that. They're becoming more civil, treating people better. The Christian nations are not forcing people to be Christian or imprisoning people for speaking against Christianity or anything like that. And the reason is because a Christian, you can reason with them, because Christ preached against all of that. Christians who indulge in that behavior are doing the opposite of what Christ taught. You can't reason with a Muslim, because the Muslims that cut off heads and amputate hands and stone people and loot and pillage and own slaves, those Muslims are doing what Muhammad did. And so Islam is always going to be violent, and it's always going to be radical. Okay, I will not be pissed off anymore when Muslims stop ruining the lives of hundreds of millions of women, robbing them of potential and dignity, and treating them worse than slaves. When Muslims stop imprisoning people for questioning the truth and brainwashing everyone and forcing their ways upon everyone. When they quit, then myself and a lot of people will stop hating Islam. But right now, an enormous amount of lives are ruined. Okay? And yes, that really bothers me. And it's a scourge that's going to decrease the quality of life everywhere. There's a high Muslim population. They make people miserable. And yes, I am concerned about what's going on in Europe and what's going to happen in America and what's happening all over the world. So I hope that you can understand my concern. And yes, I know the Old Testament really well, and it's really terrible. And I am so glad that Christ preached against that savage behavior. And I am quite disturbed that Muhammad brought it back and that Muslims continue to live that way to this day. May God bless you.